welcome back to Ask Me Drummer. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't. I'm working really hard to bring you some cool stuff on the channel. Today we have a very special guest. I will not be behind the kit. I am going to be talking with Chris Stankee of Sabian Cymbals. As you all should know, would know, in January of 2020, the music world and a lot of other people were mourning the loss of Neil Peart, the drummer from the world-famous band Rush. Being the world-famous drummer that he was, and being one of the world's most amazing drummers, a big influence of mine. And this was a huge loss in the music community and also for the people around him. Chris Stankee, although he works for Sabian, developed a personal friendship with Neil. As we all know, Neil was an avid motorcyclist, and so was Chris. So there was a lot in common that they had, and they spent some time on the road together riding motorcycles and other stuff. So I thought that this would be a great interview with Chris. Just a reminder, we're not getting into all the personal details because Neil was very private, and I respect that 100%. But in this interview, we're going to talk a little bit about Sabian, a little bit with Chris about his time with Neil and some of the times on the road and some of the stories he's got. So this is a two-part interview. So here is part one of the interview with Chris Stankee of Sabian Cymbals. G'day, Chris. How are you?
I'm great, John. How about yourself?
Fantastic. I'm a little nervous, but it's all good. Thanks for coming on.
You need to be nervous with me.
Well, thanks for coming on. This is fantastic to have you here. So tell me a little bit about yourself and what do you do over at Sabian?
Well, I'm the director of artist relations now, going on almost 23 years with Sabian, another 5 years as an endorser before that. So I think I kind of found a home around here. It's been a great ride with great people to work with, awesome craftsmanship, which is something I've always admired in my life, and getting to work with the artists who've achieved so much and who I admire and respect so much, and genuinely have an appreciation for what they do, knowing how hard it is, has served me very well. Feel very lucky. It's the only way to put it.
Well, I would have to say that me personally, I envy you in that being in that position because I mean, being a drummer myself and a Sabian guy myself, well, I've I'd be thrilled to be able to just work with the cymbal makers and meet some you met some pretty outstanding people like Chester Thompson, is it Dave Weckl, I believe you've worked with?
Yep.
Stuff like that. And the one that stands out, well, I think for a lot of people would be, well, the one and only Neil Peart, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you started designing the cymbals with him, what was that like?
Well, we met together at the factory. I flew in and he was at his place in Quebec and rode his motorcycle over, mostly in the rain that week. So we spent some time at the factory and just realized that we had a whole lot in common pre-fame for him, having both grown up in small farming communities. Both of our dads ran a farm implement business, and both of us worked in the various parts departments growing up in high school, just to help pay the bills. So just a lot of that kind of stuff, and obviously having somewhat of a drumming vocabulary in common. He obviously being one of the world's greatest who ever lived, and me, and there's me. But we hit it off pretty good because of that, and just grew a wonderful friendship from there.
So you talked about him riding his motorcycle out, from his place in Quebec to Sabian, which would have been quite the ride. It would have been a good, 8 to 10 hours easy from you were out in Meductic and he's up in Quebec.
Yeah.
Now, do you ride a motorcycle yourself?
I do, yeah. I have
Really?
for about 25 years now.
What do you
Um,
ride?
well, I started building a collection about 20 some years ago, and just started with a simple Kawasaki inline four sport tourer. I think it was a ZR7S,
Oh,
and then
nice.
picked up a Ducati Multistrada, the first generation, from there, and owned that for a real long time. and have a 68 Triumph Daytona, which I adore. It's
Oh,
just nice having a bike that whose capabilities mine are far beyond its, as opposed to, say, the new Multistrada that I have now. The second generation is about 150 horsepower rocket
nice.
ship. Its capabilities are far beyond mine. So I don't think at my age, I don't think I'll ever find the limitations of that bike, but it's sure fun to ride. So
So you're putting yourself through the paces by allowing the bike to sort of train you, right?
yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's
Well,
cool.
and,
I
you move
respect
on out
that.
of necessity. I smashed one Ducati on the side of a Mercedes,
Ouch.
about 2010, I think.
Okay.
Um, and, lucky to survive that, but
You
got
are
right
lucky,
back on
yeah.
the horse. And it was nice. Yeah, good
So
experience. Excited
apart
for the
from
others.
riding, you talk about also being a drummer at the same time. You also play drums. So not only do you work for Sabian, but you're also a drummer yourself.
Yeah, I haven't played a gig in a very long time. I moved on from playing professionally many years ago, 20 years ago.
Okay.
So I get to play here with so many of my friends and heroes and watch what they do, and
You
think of
lucky
it as a
guy.
free lesson every time somebody comes in and sits down and tries cymbals. So try to give them a good environment. Like I've got a stash of vintage Gretsch round badges, one in the progressive jazz configuration, another in more rock configuration, and then some other more modern stuff in DW collectors and a Sonar designer. So have some great stuff for them to enjoy to go with the great cymbals. Um, you know, can't come in here and expect people to have a good time playing on an import $300 drum set, so
No, no, you
try to
want,
give them a
yeah.
good experience. So I have a good experience.
Well, it's important you do that, right? And I mean,
Absolutely.
and Sabian being world renowned as well, you've got these amazing artists coming in. The last thing you want to do, like you said, is put them on a cheap generic
Yeah,
basswood or
exactly.
mahogany kit of some sort that's,
Yeah.
so you want to give them, of course. I mean, I get that. I totally get that. Now,
So you
so
ride as well, don't you?
yes, I do. I've been a rider pretty much all my life. I'm 49 and I got my license when I was 16 and got my
Yeah.
G, and then I got my M within a month because we could do that back then. And yeah, I've been riding ever since. I've owned motorcycles since, and I put on, just like you, miles and miles and miles, and just it's never gotten out of me. I just love motorcycling. I own a shop where I repair motorcycles. And I mean, it's just, I've
What do
owned
you
all
prefer to
kinds of bikes.
ride?
Pardon me?
What do you prefer to ride?
Now I like my cruisers.
Hmm.
I mean, it depends. I mean, I just sold my V Rod, which I've owned for 10 years, and it was a fun ride.
Yeah, very underrated bike.
Yeah,
And
oh
it's
yeah,
owned
it
by
handles
Porsche.
great. It's a powerhouse and stupid reliable compared to a lot of other Harleys.
Yeah.
But I enjoyed it. It's a very different ride. I've had FJ 1200s. I mean, I rode that. I rode Seicas. I rode Maxims. I've never owned an adventure bike because, well, I'm short. I'm 5'7", so getting on an adventure bike for me is a little bit of a challenge. So it makes it, if I
Yeah.
have to stop at a red light, you're going to see me like this, tilting sideways to keep one foot on the ground. I
And
mean,
GS would not be the bike for you.
no, oh gosh, no, no, no. When I work on a dirt bike at my shop, I have to get up on a stool to kickstart it because seriously,
Yeah.
there's no other way for me to try to kickstart that bike. It's the only way to do it. So now I own a vintage Yamaha Seika 900, which they only made 1 year, and only 1,000 were imported. So I own that, which is actually it's a fun little ride. I think it
What
was too
CCs are
advanced.
those again? Didn't they have two of those, like 400 and 900?
900.
900.
It's a 900 cc. It's the only one they made, 1 year only, and only 1,000 were imported in here.
Wow.
Um,
Sound like a
Underrated
half-fared
bike.
naked sport bike?
Yep, that's what it is. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah, I remember that.
I think it was too advanced for its time because it had 1983, 84. It had, well, it came out between 83 and 84. That's the
Mhm.
year they came out, and it had, anti-dive shocks. It had vented rotors with dual piston calipers, front and back. It had piggyback shocks on the back, which came stock from the factory. So it was a pretty decent bike, but I think, it just wasn't the right time for that bike, and it failed.
There was
But
a lot of that kind of stuff and
yeah,
innovation going on back then.
oh,
Not
Japanese
just
were
in
big for
bikes.
that.
Like a Honda with the CBX with that inline
Oh,
six.
the six
Just
cylinder. Yeah,
all
but
sorts of different cool stuff going on then.
working on those carburetors on those CBXs was just hell.
Yeah, I have a buddy that has one, and he's got it set up just right. Finally, I think there's only one or two guys in all of LA that would even touch it because
Yeah,
sinking six carbs is just not
probably the
impossible, but a gigantic pain. And
probably the same
nobody wants
guys
to
who
see
worked
that.
on Jay Leno's bike because he's got one too. So I wouldn't
Yeah.
be surprised.
Hmm.
So I know Neil rode a GS. I mean, he was a tall lad. I mean, he was 6'1" or something like that, so he would fit on that.
I think
You know,
6'3", 6'4".
oh man, taller than I expected.
Mhm.
So when he came into Sabian, we'll talk a bit about cymbals here. When he came to design them, can you what's the process of that? How does that work? So I come in and I want you to design a set of cymbals. I have a sound in my head that I want you to replicate, and I have to translate what I want into what you're going to produce. How does that work?
Well, you just get a start by introducing them to, what it actually takes to make a cymbal. So we had a couple days at the factory with Neil, and it's just almost easier to always start with the ride cymbal.
Okay.
For those that's the most important thing to them. Most of the signature symbols are ride symbols. So, we started with that and quickly whipped up some prototypes of the recipe that had hand hammered bells with a pinpoint lathe on top, similar to the AAX, a wide lathe underneath, similar to the AA series, and
Okay.
the old traditional AA hammering, the automated anvil, as we call it. It's been around since the 20s. So combining all those different uh, pieces of the recipe into different weights and profiles, sort of where we started. And we pretty much had a ride nailed down that day. And what's funny is that ride that we made that day is the one he used all the way up through the last show on R40. Um,
Really, eh?
I labeled, all the prototypes A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and it was letter G that he used all those years. He had some additional that he used in the practice room, on tour, and on the Time Machine tour when we put uh, the alchemical symbol graphics, steampunk graphics on the
Yes.
symbols.
Yeah, those are
We use
beautiful.
that on Time Machine and Clockwork Angels. But I think even before the end of Clockwork Angels, he went back to uh, letter G as the
Hmm.
main ride because he just missed it. You know, Similar to the Canadian made A that he used all the years before that with Rush. That also came out of the Sabian factory. It was called ASCO, part of the
Yes.
Azilgen company. Um, and so he was a creature of habit for sure. But
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that's how it all started with that ride symbol. And then from there, since I'm in LA and he was in LA, we would get together at the office in Burbank. It used to be Steve Ferroni's recording rehearsal studio on one half with a bunch of producers that worked out of it. Great
Interesting.
people. And then on the other side of the wall was the Sabian office and showroom. So he would come up there and we would check out all the designs, go through, half a dozen or a dozen of each model variation, and just quickly nail it down. And say quickly, we had to go through half a dozen of those visits probably until we
Hmm.
had everything solidified because, you can only test symbols so long before your ears start going to compression and you're
Yeah.
testing six of the same model. You got to take your time and take your breaks. And luckily, Neil's always super patient, um, analytical about things,
Hmm.
and really took his time. creating those models, making sure they would work for Rush for the years to come. And they did for almost 2 decades. So we had a lot of fun doing that. There was only one kind of freak out moment where actually I've got the symbol right here. Neil always used a 19-inch Wuhan
Yes.
symbol, and he sent that to the factory. This guy even wrote on
I
it.
had one of
In
those.
case this didn't work out, Neil actually wrote on here. Neil's personal China, so he could get it back.
No way.
I don't know what
That
these
is so
Wuhans
cool.
cost. I think they're like $50 or something, as opposed to
I
$30
had one.
Paragon symbol.
Yeah.
But whoops. So that worked out. Except he when we put it up on the stand to test, he told me to put as many felts on the stand and crank it as tight as I could possibly get it. And I was just thinking, wow, we didn't know that. So
Are we
I
talking about the
was thinking,
China?
yeah, we're talking about that
Okay.
China, the prototype China. The Paragon has a totally different bell because
Yeah.
the Wuhans are rotocast, they're poured in
Yeah.
molten and just spun around into a mold. Ours are actually rolled out and hammered, and
That's
the
right.
cups are pressed in. So, having the ability to do that cup would require an entirely different way of manufacturing. And clamping it to the stand would completely change the sound. So we matched the sound as it was, free floating. And when we clamped
Okay.
it to the stand, I'm like, okay, well, there's no way this is going to work because we didn't design it that to be mounted that way, and just hadn't thought about it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And when we put it up and clamped it down, sure enough, it worked just fine. It was that Mystic Rhythms China sound. That's what
Yeah,
that
it's
symbol is.
very choked, eh?
It is, but it's just got
Yeah.
that burst of white noise. It's
Yeah.
not long, it's not long sustain or anything, but it worked great. So we kind of got lucky there.
So the Paragon line, like you're talking about the ride, and you went on to saying how, you got the hand hammered belt, and then you got, other parts of them where you're mixing. So this thing is really, it's almost a hybrid, right? Is what we would call it. And I guess a
Yeah.
lot of custom cymbals would become a hybrid of different manufacturing methods. Am I correct?
Yes. Yeah.
So
I mean,
that's
it's just key ingredients, You always got to have salt. You always got to have, all these
mhm.
combinations of flavors, for what you're trying to make. You can't have
Well,
chili without chili powder and yada yada yada. But you can use turkey, or if you're crazy, or
mhm.
use beef, pork, sausage, whatever you want. So it's just a matter of combining all those different things that you know and like into the right recipe to come out with a
Yeah,
great symbol.
yeah. So Neil being Canadian, when he approached Sabian to, you know, design cymbals for him because he went from Zildjian to Sabian, um, were people in the factory sort of ecstatic knowing that, this guy was moving over? That must have been a pretty big thing for Sabian to have Neil come and want to be a part of the Sabian family.
Oh, absolutely. Everybody at Sabian knew that, we had to get it right
Mm.
before that anything was going to be official. So we've had, artists come before for visits and do the same kind of thing and
Yeah.
then decide it wasn't for them. So thankfully, with Neil, it was, and he really got on with Mark Love, our master, product specialist and head of R&D.
Mhm.
So that just made it easy. He really liked Bob Zildjian, Andy's
Yeah.
dad, who was around, and you know, Bob liked to have a scotch at the end of the day out on the deck, look at the river as just as much as Neil did. So
Yeah.
had some
Yeah.
great conversation those nights, and it was just again the right combination.
The right combination. And then you and him also hit it off, a little more personally as well, because like you said, you both grew up on a farm in Ontario. So both your fathers worked in the same industry, and then, so on and so
I
on.
was in Iowa, he was in Ontario. It's just
Okay, sorry. So you're American. I'm sorry.
yeah,
I'm sorry. But you're still, you're still working for a Canadian company, so I'll forgive you for that. I'm just kidding.
yeah.
It's all good. Um Now, were you expecting to have some sort of a friendship come out of this with Neil, or was just totally something that caught you by surprise?
Well, having all that stuff in common and then realizing, obviously I knew he liked motorcycles and so
Mhm.
did I at that time. So, we just went on a couple short rides together out in the mountains here in LA, in the Santa Monica Mountains, and then took a couple trips up to DW together. Had a lot of close friends out there. So, again, just more friends in common that I could introduce him to and he could introduce me to. And having fun doing it on a bike was a lot of blast. It was a blast for sure.
Well, especially for him, because the more time in the saddle for him was the best, right? It was his thing. I mean, I read his books, and I mean, well, number one, well, we know Ghost Rider, we know that one, and that's how things developed into that. And I recommend, I'm going to say this to the viewers right now, if you have not read Ghost Rider by Neil Peart, you're going to want to, because it's going to shed a lot of light on who he is, where he's come from, from his the tragedy he's gone through before with his family that has since deceased, and on to the new stuff. But his journey of healing on his motorcycle is something that I think a lot of us motorcyclists can relate to. And in order to have a good connection with Neil, not just musically, but personally, that aspect of him in the book, just like I was reading it, and just, you know, it was incredible how many things I could relate to.
Mhm.
Because I've been through some trauma in my life where I actually took off, not as long as him, but I toured the province of Quebec with on my motorcycle for a little over a month on my own with nothing but a backpack, because I was going through turmoil. So there was a lot of things that I could relate to, and it just hit me. It was like, man, like there's so much here that's just hits home, right? And the motorcycling thing, I'm sure bonded you guys even more, just that much more.
Well, as well as I do, I think a lot of people when they, check out to heal, you know, maybe the motorcycle is a tool to do that.
Yeah.
And they come back and, they don't want to, relive that experience. So they might walk away from it. But
Yeah.
luckily, Neil decided that, the joy of riding was, more important than reliving that tragedy, which I'm sure,
Mhm.
how could you not?
Well, of
Um,
course. Yeah.
but I would tell people that haven't read that book, it's a tough read.
Oh, it most
Just,
certainly is.
I mean, it's the guy's heart and tragedy rolled out on paper through journals, and I would just tell you that stick with it. It's rewarding. It's got a happy ending.
Oh, absolutely. I agree. I went through the whole book, and I even went listened to it through Audible to try to get, a sense of the tone of voice.
Mhm.
I did the same thing with Geddy Lee's book, My Effing Life, and man, some of those are hard, they're hard reads, but
I
it's life,
just
right?
finished that. I thought Getty did a fantastic job. It was
Oh,
such a great book.
outstanding, eh? What
Yeah.
like what did you get out of that one?
Well, it's weird for somebody like me who, first heard Tom Sawyer in the back seat of my mom's station wagon on the way to daycare at 9 years old. So it was, it's weird hearing about that whole development and learning about, that coming into stardom and, relating to all those great tunes growing up, not having known the guy.
Yeah,
And then later in life, after all he'd been through and not wanting to pry, we just sort
yeah,
of, developed a friendship organically because, I'm not going to sit there and ask him, so how did
yeah.
you play Tom Sawyer, that kind of stuff. So he appreciated that. And it was just very cool, though, to hear that sort of biographical stuff from Getty because Neil never wrote much about that.
No,
Uh,
he didn't. No.
so it was just cool to come
So you
into
got it.
that merge
Yeah,
and, know a lot about what happened the last 20, 25 years, but not all the great things that they accomplished before that.
I get that. And this kind of leads us to um where this is just so everyone knows, this is going to be a two-part interview. I wanted to start off with a lot of this, the drum talk and everything. And you also did you mentioned in one of your, I was watching one of the Neil memorial videos where you discussed, how you would drum with him too sometimes. That must have been quite the experience to, have like, has he ever taught you anything? Or were you guys just drumming just for fun?
Basically just drumming for fun, but every time I saw him play, I learned something new.
Oh,
You know?
how can you not, right?
Yeah.
How can you not?
Yeah, you try not to think about, you're hanging with a friend, not not an
Yep,
icon.
exactly. And I want to get to that point. I want us, the viewers who are going to watch this, I need you to understand that I spoke to Chris before this, and I thanked him personally for being the friend that he was to Neil, because everyone who knew Neil, who truly wants to understand Neil, knew that he was very private. He, in his own words, he didn't like anyone who had a sense of adulation or anything like that. And I have massive respect for Chris, because Chris became a personal friend to Neil. And we're not going to go into deep stuff because I want to respect Neil and his wishes. I also respect Chris for, maintaining a really tight friendship with Neil, but also for coming on here and sharing some of the stuff. So in the second segment, we're going to get into more of the motorcycling stuff and, stuff like that. But I think it's important that I thank you, Chris, in front of everyone, because, a lot of people they become selfish, right? Some humans just get selfish and would sell information or whatever, right? For, for fame or whatever. And I think that you yourself as a person, and also with Sabian, has shown a lot of integrity. And that to me says a lot about who you are. And I think it's just phenomenal that you were the friend that you were for Neil up until the end. And I cannot imagine how difficult it would have been for you, because, in the times that you knew each other, in the 20 some odd years, and you grew this friendship, and, all of a sudden, well, it's been 4 years now already. It's, wow, it goes fast. And all I can say is thank you so much, because from the bottom of my heart, I'm, it, I love Neil. I love Rush. Um, but again, I also have a lot of respect for what his wishes were and how he was in life. And I think it's phenomenal. So again, a huge thank you to you, before we get into the other stuff. And you really need that clap, because that's phenomenal. And, again, can't be easy for you right now. I totally understand.
Well, thanks for having me, John.
Well, what we're gonna do now is we're gonna stop at part one and stay tuned for part two. We'll be right back.